Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Recovery in the Raw, and I am Luna fucking Rose. This is a platform where real recovering addicts share their experience, strength, and hope. We feature one or more speakers' story within a month, maybe sometimes more. Graphic language is permitted. In the meantime, we encourage you to leave comments. Although we are not affiliated with NA or any 12-step fellowship, approved literature is permitted. Just remember, this is your recovery in the raw. If you want to speak, we would love to hear your story. Or if you would like to donate, please send either request to recovery in the raw 2050 at gmail.com. Thank you and many blessings. And today, family, I bring to you the one, the only Rattlesnake Dan. Rattlesnake, why don't you tell us where you hail from, what your clean time is, and go from there.
Yeah, hey, hi Luna. Thank you for having me today. My name is RattleSnake Dan. I have just over 2 years clean and within a 12-step fellowship program. I'm glad to be here and share my story.
Okay, why don't you
Where do
tell
I,
us, why don't you
yeah,
tell
where
us,
do I hail from, you asked? That's right. I'm originally
yeah,
from Southern California, outside of Los Angeles. That's where I was born and spent the first half of my life. The second part of my life, I moved to the great state of Idaho, and I lived since I was 10 years old in the Pacific Northwest.
okay. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your, sh- tell us a little bit about your childhood, and what it was like growing up with your parents.
Yeah, my memories go pretty far back. My very, very first memory is actually my house burning down in 1989. Uh, um, I accidentally lit that house fire and burnt my house down, and that's my very, very first memory. Was being there, being held by some of the neighbors. So my mom ran back in the burning house. Me and my older brother, who's been disabled since birth, were outside, and she ran back in to get my little brother, who was just a couple months old. And that's sort of my first memory, which looking back, I suppose you could call that a traumatic experience. With that, my mom was a really good mom. She had three sons, right? All with my dad. My parents had been married and divorced twice to each other, and they only had kids with each other. My dad was an addict. He was also affiliated with certain elements of organized crime. My dad had things like tattooed on him that he had earned, like our hometown across his stomach. Lightning bolts on his neck. Right, certain things that you earn like that. And yeah, I had asked my mom at 4 years old if Santa Claus was real, and I had asked her if at 5 years old if my dad did drugs. And she told me the true and correct answer to both of those things. Right. Um, with that, yeah. Um, my next memory is probably being at like the San Diego Zoo, and I had an accident there and cracked my head open, and I remember them having to put like needles, like poke me with needles. That was kind of traumatic, and I think and right within a short time these things happened. I was in a car wreck with my dad around the same time. And then, I'm one of those kids. I'm the reason why they have childproof locks on medications. Because when I was like two, I built ladders going up, and I took some of my older brother's medications, and I had overdosed. And my older brother, who's disabled, had come in and saw me eating the medications. And the paramedic said if I had swallowed that second mouthful, my heart would have stopped before the ambulance could have got there. I remember them pumping my stomach, feeding me charcoal and stuff. So yeah, that was kind of early on. When our house burnt down, my dad was actually supposed to turn himself into prison. My dad had done 5 different prison terms, and he got a little bit of extra time because our house had burnt down before he had to go do a stint. And while he was in prison, we moved to Section 8 housing. So I remember living in the Section 8 housing and waiting by the window for my dad to come home for prison. Those are some of my earliest memories. Um, you know, yeah, yeah.
Wow. Well, it kind of sounded like you had, such a rough start as well. Moving along, when did you first get introduced to any kind of substance?
Yeah. So I was always aware that drugs existed. My mom had talked to me about drugs. She was very concerned that, we grew up in a place with a lot of poverty, a lot of gang violence. Um, and the first time that I recall having a beer, not to I'll just tell my story how it is. My cousin had come over, my big cousin. He later became a gang member, but we were still kids. I was probably about 5 and he was about 7, and his mom had sent him with $20 for the weekend. My dad had asked if he could borrow the $20 from my cousin so he could buy some beer, and he would give each of us one. And so I think I was about 5 years old, maybe 6, having a Budweiser with my cousin behind the shed. My dad said, "Don't let your mom know." And so we were back there drinking this beer, and we thought we were so cool. And I remember both of us thinking it tasted like shit, but it was really cool getting to drink a beer. So that was my first introduction to any kind of substance. And then when I was about 7 years old, right, and I lived in the ghetto, right, like, I'm one of the few people that look like me in my neighborhood, right. There was only, other than my brothers, there was only one other white kid on the block, um, right, and we would, I remember right around the same time, 7 years old, maybe 8. One of my friend's house, 3 houses down, was shot up in a drive-by shooting, right. And we used to play games like hide from the helicopter spotlights. Like, all the neighborhood kids knew if we were playing tag or whatever, when the helicopter lights come over, we had to hide from the lights. Otherwise, you were dead. The police had killed you, right? And we used to play drive by also, and we'd hide out. And when the cars passed by, if their headlights touched you, you were dead. All right. And so I was maybe 7, 8 years old, and one of my mom's friends had come back from traveling and visiting Europe. And she had brought a variety of like these European beers and wines, like flavored, and my mom was letting us sample little drinks of those. Well, I liked it right away. Those were tasty, and I got to sample the 8 or 10 different kinds, and I went back and got more. And I remember I actually have pictures from that night, like some crazy hat on, was dressing funny, and I definitely was intoxicated for the first time, about 7, 8 years old. Again, on alcohol, right? And similarly, we would steal cigarettes from our parents. Both my parents smoked. Most of my friends smoked cigarettes. Their parents, and so we used to steal cigarettes from our parents, and four, maybe 4 of us or something. We'd go out and smoke cigarettes out in this little fort I had that was a swing set with tarps around it. And I remember my hearing my dad come home, and we were like, "Oh shit, we're trying to hide the cigarettes." And my dad caught us smoking one of my mom's cigarettes, and thought we were in trouble. And my dad goes, "Oh, you guys are smoking? Don't hide. Come on, that's cool." And we're like, "What? It's cool?" He said, "Yeah, don't hide. Come on." He took us to the shed, and he handed each of us a Camel non-filter. And we thought we were so cool smoking with dad. And when we got done, he said, "You want another one?" Sure. So we smoked another one. By the third one, we knew something was wrong. And he made us smoke until we were turning green, right? And he said, "Don't half inhale. No, they cost money. You're not going to waste it. You want to smoke a cigarette, smoke it." And by the fourth or fifth one, he said, "We're begging, please. We don't want to smoke." And he said, "You're done? You're finished?" We said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, then put them out." And he told us 2 things, right? He said, one, don't be stealing your mom's cigarettes. And two, if you ever want a cigarette again, you just come ask me. I remember being a teenager, 16 years old, and drinking and stuff, and asking that same cousin I had the Budweiser with. I said, "Hey, cuz, will you bum me a smoke?" He said, "Your dad's here." He said, "You go ask him." And I would not ask my father for a cigarette. I can tell you that. So yeah, that's like my earliest exposure.
Sorry about that. So did that did the way he treat you, did it learn you something or did it make you want to do things more down the road
Oh
because of
no,
what
my
he's
dad,
been?
my dad was always trying to teach me something, right? Like, there was kind of two sides to my dad. The one side, is what, I told you, he had tattoos he had earned. My dad had a reputation for being, people were there was two things. My dad had a reputation for being, you did not want to mess with my father, right? He was a dangerous man, and my family included, right? Um, I would go around the hood as a kid, and something that gave me a sense of safety, very, very twisted looking back on it, right? But I remember showing up at the park and kind of walking sort of, like a little 80s, 90s punk kid with my fist kind of in my, patting the other hand, kind of looking for a fight. And I remember thinking, if someone kills me, my family will kill them. And that gave me a sense of safety and security, right? My dad was a big connect, and he had lots of connections, right, to dangerous people and organized crime. Now, on the other note, my dad was a very generous person. He was a very, he would always try to teach me good values, right? My dad taught me patriotism, that we love our country. He taught me, both my parents taught me family values. My dad did not want us to, he said, you can cuss around the men all you want, but I don't ever want to hear it around your mother or other
Lay
little
down.
kids.
Go lay
You
down.
hold doors, right? You hold doors for people,
Go lay down.
regardless of if they're men, women, young, old, white, black. You hold doors for people, right? My dad had a sense of respect and propriety and community. My dad never ever ever wanted me to be involved with drugs. Right. My dad was an addict and had his own battle. And my mom would tell us things like, she would always let us know dad loves you, but dad's an addict, right? Dad has a problem. It's not that he doesn't love you when he leaves for days or weeks on end.
Go.
Um, when dad goes to prison, um, it's not because he doesn't love you guys, it's because he has a problem with substances. And so my dad very much never wanted us, neither of my parents wanted us to have any life like involved with gangs or drugs. But it's something that we were around a lot, right? My actual my home environment was very safe. My dad would go somewhere else and sell drugs or cook methamphetamine, right? My dad never would have drugs at our house, other than maybe some personal, use. Marijuana we'd smell sometimes from the shed, but it was never in our home. And among my cousins and our other friends in the hood, like my house was known as a very safe space, right? There weren't people being, my home itself was a place. The elements in my environment were very dangerous outside of our yard, right? But yeah, my dad wanted to always teach me some kind of lesson. He was very interested in, at another one of my earliest memories, right? When my dad wasn't selling drugs and committing crimes like, robbing trains or doing things like that, he would work construction. And I remember my dad telling me, and my dad always did well on parole. Um, right. And I can picture, I was maybe 4 years old or something, five, my dad on one knee looking at me and telling me, when you grow up, you make money with your mind, not your back, like me. So my parents always wanted something better than the life they had. Yeah.
So then, moving forward, what did your teenage years look like? And, when did you start really dabbling into the street drugs?
Right. Yeah. So when I was 10 years old, we moved out of California, right? My parents divorced. my dad stayed in California. That was his home, so I would always go spend summers there. And I didn't fit in, right? When I moved from a big city to a very rural town, I was not accepted. Um, you know, I got bullied in the hood. I got bullied in a rural community, right? And and I always felt like I had to maintain my edge. Like I felt like I could be a Californian in Idaho, but I could not be an Idahoan in California if I was to survive. And so I started smoking marijuana at about 11 years old, and 11, 12. And by the time I was 13, I caught my first case, right? They wanted to give me a year in juvenile hall. It was for vandalism. And, you know, I was drinking, 40 ounces regularly by the time I was 12. I really don't remember seventh grade. I remember drawing a picture of a bong in class, and that's the only reason I know for sure I was smoking weed in seventh grade because the classroom I was in was a seventh grade classroom. But I really don't remember seventh grade if I'm being honest. And by 12, I ran around with like by I remember by the time I was 13, I ran around with little crews, little wannabe gang members, juvenile delinquents, and so yeah, drinking and smoking weed. And when I got in trouble at 13, I quit smoking weed. I knew that case was coming, and while it was pending, I stopped smoking weed, and I wanted to be reformed, and I waited the 6 months, a year for probation before I went back to drinking alcohol at 14. And at 14, I had a friend who was maybe 17 or 18 who had prescriptions for like Xanax. And so, we'd take a Xanax bar and we'd drink a 40. And, at about 15, I got a girlfriend, that was captain of the cheerleading squad, captain of the, co-captain of the dance team. She was a senior. And she didn't like me taking the pills and she asked me to stop. And the last time I ever took a Xanax bar, I was 15 and she was mad at me and I threw it in the fire. Um, and I'm grateful at that time I made that choice. Um, and then it was just alcohol until I was 20 years old, just alcohol.
Well, sweet Caroline, it sounded like you had quite the life coming up um, at such a young age. Uh, when did you graduate? Were you able to graduate with everything that was going on and everything you were involved with?
Yeah, yeah, one of the requirements of my probation at 13, right? I was 13 to 14. I was going to go into high school. My mom told me to wait till I was 14 and in high school, and she'd allow me to get my ears pierced, right? It was just one ear that was cool back then. Right. And part of my terms of probation was to maintain a C average in school. And someone gave me the tip of taking notes in class. And as I was looking at my life, I didn't want to go to juvenile hall. And I started thinking about my future and like what my dad had told me. And I started getting good grades, like not just okay grades. Like I became virtually a straight A student. I had some B's, right? Um, but I started getting all A's and B's, period. You know, um, and by ninth grade, my mom also told me if I waited till I was 18, she would buy me my first tattoo. She didn't want me doing like a lot of my friends and getting them, in people's living rooms. And I thought that was a pretty good deal. And she told me, my mom's very practical, a realist, and she said, look, you can keep growing, your skin's gonna move. Wait till you're 18 and I'll buy your first tattoo because I had always wanted tattoos, right? Um, and so yeah, by ninth grade, I was getting, really good grades, all A's and B's, and I realized I had a natural affinity for books and for subject, just I have a natural intelligence, to be honest, right?
I couldn't tell.
And
I couldn't tell that at all.
thanks, Luna.
I'm
And
just
so
kidding.
so I appreciate the little bit of humor, right? You know, you got to watch out for smart people that tell you they're smart people, right? But facts are facts. And so I decided, hey, I want to do something no one in my family's ever done, and I want to go to college, right? I would rather go to college than prison. You know, I kind of looked at it. What are my paths forward here? You know, I still maintain my edge. You know, I started carrying a knife at 11 years old, right? And you
You're
know,
doing the
like I
Michael
said, I spent
Jackson dance. Just beat it and shit.
just beat it. Well, you know, weapons were you know, my mom taught me at a young age. She said if I was taught things like look, you never start a fight but you always finish it, right? My dad would say never start a fight, you always finish it.
So,
My mom would say if they're bigger than you, get an equalizer, which I took to mean a weapon, right? And I got sick of getting jumped as a young kid. You know, one of the first times I ever got jumped, right, was because of my skin color. And you know, 4 or 5 kids, they jumped me, right? And I came home from school. This is still in California in the hood. I came home from school and my dad was outside, and I told him there was a fight, and he said they jumped you. Nope. He said get in the truck. And we drove around the block, right through the neighborhoods looking. We went over to the Cambodian hood, the black hood. We went looking for this group of kids, right? And when I saw them, we pulled up. My dad got out and he said, "You guys want to jump my son?" He said, "Line up. My son will fight every one of you individually and he'll whoop every one of your asses." And those boys did not want to fight me one on one. And that taught me something that day, right? About how quote, you know, how a convict conducts themselves, right? That mentality. Um, and many times in my life, I've told people, you know, I had a lot of fist fighting growing up from a young age into my 20s. And, you know, I'll tell you this, you haven't been in a real fight until you've been beat up. And I've been beat up and I've also caused great harm, you know. And so looking at that, right, I did excellent in school. And like I said, by the time I was a sophomore, I had a, you know, the pretty senior girlfriend and life was going pretty darn good. I started working at like 15, 16 years old. I bought my first car at 16, and things were looking pretty good for me, right?
when it, when did shit hit the fan?
Mm. Say at 20 years old, right? I was a sophomore in college. Was back home in California on break, and I was at an underground rap concert with my little brother and some other, you know, some other. All the people I was there with were all from our hometown, right? Our dads also all had our hometown tattooed on them, right? And there were some people from a different. They were not from where we're from, right? DA's witnesses varied. They said 8 to 12 people jumped my little brother, and I shot someone that night. I had a legally registered 9 millimeter pistol in my trunk. And when my knife got knocked out of my hand that night, I went and I got my gun, right? So I had defense of another. Um, you know, they told me that the man that I'd shot died. It turns out he just had a bullet in his shoulder, missed his heart by a couple inches. And sitting in a 3,000 man detention facility, I took a long, hard look at my life that night because why was I at that concert, right? I was there to drink. I did that, right? I was there to party. I was there to dance with girls, and I was there to fight, and I did all those things. Um, you know, and the truth is, I'd always liked, you know, I always had liked, you know, I always wanted to be a gangster, right? Until you're shackled to other men riding a bus, right? Until you're standing in holding cells with people, you know, that have, you know, that have the tattoos of organized crime on them, right? Until you're sitting in between.
You cut out a little bit. Are you there?
And I took a look at my life and I said, if I could go back and do it over again, because I was sure I was going away for life, right? They gave me, you know, a couple counts of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon. You know, I had five felonies, 6 by the end. And maximum exposure on my case was 110 years. And I thought, you know, if I could go back and do life over again, I would no longer drink alcohol, right? And that was a 3.5 year ordeal. with the California Department of Corrections, the judicial system there. Um, and I kept taking classes like online because I was in college. And the day I got done doing my time, right? Because they dropped the attempted murders. I had defense of another, but they gave me 2 strikes, right? And 7 years, 9 months in prison. And I didn't do all that time, thankfully. But when I got out, I was the day I got out, it's a trip how God works. The day I got out, I was a senior in college, and I had earned a time dot behind the walls. Um, and when I showed my dad that time dot, he, I had been asked to speak for my race while I was in there, right? A rep, um, you know, for the white boys, the Peckerwoods, and I had earned a time dot right on my elbow. And when I told my dad I had been a rep in there, he was so proud of me, so proud of me. Right, I had been chosen, to speak for my race, and and I showed him my time dot, and my dad smiled and showed me his. He had one in the exact same spot, and all my life I thought that was a mole. I thought my dad had a mole, but it wasn't. It was his time dot from his first stint.
All right. How many dots do you have total?
Mm, just one.
Good.
And I only ever
Good.
had, yep, just one felony case ever. I've had a variety of misdemeanors, but
So
just the one.
when did the hard drugs come into play?
Yeah, so at 20, let's see. Let's see. So yeah, I did my time. I turned 22 behind the walls. Right. So I got arrested
Oh,
at
there you
20. I
go.
turned what?
Sorry, I didn't. I thought I
Oh,
had it
you're
down.
okay. Yeah. My best birthday I ever had was my 22nd birthday while incarcerated, and I got out, let's see, it was 23, and I finished up felony probation. I was 24 or 25, and um, I I went. I had was about to graduate college, right, with 2 bachelor's degrees. Um, and as I went down, I went back to California to ask to get off felony probation early. Um, the judge, I had excellent recommendations from my interstate compact probation officer, from my POs up here, and I was about to graduate college. And here's a miracle that God gave me. She said, "Yeah, I'll release you from probation early." And then she said, "I understand that you're about to graduate college." I said, "Yes, Your Honor." And she said, "You have excellent letters of recommendation from all your probation officers." She said, "So I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to withdraw your plea of guilty, enter a plea of not guilty, and this case is dismissed." And she slammed her gavel. So I think I was, yeah, 24, 25, and I got my life back. Miracle, right? It was all I could do not to cry in that courtroom. And as I left, I went to see some of our best friends where my mom lived before I traveled back to Idaho. And my friends were having a party for me, right? I had just spent a couple years 18 months at least fighting life in prison, and then did my stint, right? There was a lot of stress on me, and I didn't cry, not for 3.5 years. And I was very, I'd become hardened in many respects. While I was incarcerated, I decided to start reading the Bible. And I'd started to kind of dabble with church just a little bit, just to get out of the cell. But I'd started reading the Bible and exercising, right? And so I was pretty physically fit, and
You know what we call
many.
that?
What's
You
that?
know, when you get religion um in jail, we call it a jailhouse religion. Um, because when you first go in, you're like, oh God, save me, God help me, get me out of this situation. Oh my God. And you turn to God, while you're in jail. And a lot of people they let that go when they get out.
Yeah,
Did you
yeah. See,
did
when I was, I kind of did that, those foxhole prayers when I was still facing life, right? And then I got out and I was fighting my case still. Um, And, I knew God had given me a miracle because, I have paperwork that says assault with a deadly weapon causing great bodily injury and the death of, and then it has the victim's name, right? And the judge looked at me at, my fourth day in there because I was in there over New Year's Eve. And the judge looked at me and at the arraignment over video court and said, since no other charges had been filed, but someone died in the matter, he raised my bail, right? And so I was certain that I had killed a man. And then when that turned out not to be true, right, when my public defender came out yelling at me, saying, but wasn't saying nothing about the guy dying, you're in college, you're not stupid, you brought a gun to a fist fight. And I said, what about the guy? And he said, well, he's got a bullet in his shoulder. Other than that, he's fine. And I showed him my paperwork, and that public defender said, well, it's a typo. So you believe in typos or you believe in miracles? Because I believe miracles, right? And so I decided,
That's one hell of a typo.
right, that's a hell of a typo. And so I decided before I was going to do my time, um, I had read all the scriptures on baptism, and I really felt like God gave me a miracle. And so I was worried about, if I was going to go do prison time, then what would I have to do to survive? And I didn't, and then about 2 weeks before I was actually going to go do my time and serve my sentence, I decided to get baptized in the Snake River on the border of Idaho and Washington. And I came to the conclusion that if I was baptized, I don't have to worry about what I would have to do to survive while incarcerated, right? God would protect me. And so I got baptized. I went and did my time and decided to read the Bible. But, religion wasn't sufficient for me, right? And when I had been released from probation, when my case had been dismissed and I got my life back, my friends have this party for me, and they have uh, cocaine and ecstasy there, and I did both of them that night. And here's the thing: it was like I had rediscovered color. I had rediscovered empathy. It felt so good. There was a really hot chick there I was making out with all night. It was a lot of fun, and all this stress and weight was lifted off of me at about 25 years old. And I did ecstasy for the next 6 weekends in a row. That should have been my clue I was an addict.
Did you and again for anyone listening, sorry for any sound or overtalk discrepancies. I was dealing with my dog and she kept bugging the shit out of me, so I apologize. But so after you rediscovered this newness, when did you really start to know that it started to really take a toll on your life? Like they say, like, if something takes something, more precedence over your entire life, then it's more than likely an issue, if you're focusing
Right.
on, not.
Yeah, yeah. So I still worked, right? I worked and I'd party on the weekends and I would, I liked the stimulants. But my little brother would do any variety of substances. So, by the time I was 26, 27, I would do opiates when they were available. I really liked ecstasy. I enjoyed cocaine. And I decided to go to graduate school, which again, right. And so I had wanted to, work on a master's project kind of based in some of my experience while I was incarcerated, filling a literature gap there. And, um, and I got into graduate school and, one of my very good friends from high school, his cousin was a PhD student, and I had inherited a home, um, from my grandma, and I would rent the downstairs, right? And so I rented to this PhD student, and immediately he asked if I knew where to get weed. Well, sure, I was the weed man, right? I would just help friends out of my sack, and I always had drugs for free that way, right? I didn't really like sell drugs. I never seen a drug dealer get rich. My path was to get a career through education, and after like the first week or so, he asked me if I could find Adderall. And I said, yeah, I'll ask around. So, a day or two went by and I had him a prescription of Adderall, but, I would keep Suboxone, cocaine, ecstasy, weed, Roxy's, Oxys, methadones, whatever. And now Adderall, like in this, in sort of my closet cache of drugs, right, for the weekends. And that's when I started. I like the Adderall. It didn't really give me much of a hangover. And I would go on about working and doing my graduate studies, right? Maybe the last year or so. And I started taking it every single day. And by that time, I had met my future wife and was engaged. And I knew I had a problem about 2 weeks before our wedding. We were going to take engagement photos. And I had given her the bottle and said, "Hey, I'm doing too many of these. Will you just give me one when I ask?" And she was upset with me that I needed one before taking the engagement photos. And she had asked me a very directed question. She said, "Are you going to be high at our wedding?" And I was offended when she first said it. Right. And I was like, "What? Like, of course I won't be." But I realized in that moment that was a valid question to ask me because I had gone from a weekend user to an everyday user. And I gave her my word that I would be clean at our wedding. So I used the rest of that prescription, and I went abstinent for about 2 weeks before the wedding, and I got married clean. And I also didn't drink alcohol from the ages of 20 to 30, right? 10 years no alcohol, as I progressed into to street drugs, though.
Um, w- what made you, or what turned you to discover recovery?
Yeah. Well, I was married for 10 years. We had 3 kids together. And with each kid, I got worse, right? And I'd substitute, between different substances, right? Whether they were uppers or downers or whatever was available. And I did get a salaried job. I was a salaried employee, and I had collected property, cars, houses. Things were going good from the outside looking in. It looked like just looked like just I had my life together to anybody on the outside. But there were problems within my marriage, right? And um, and then my wife asked for a divorce. And I thought, I've tried substituting substances, I've tried going abstinent, I tried the MAP program, I had tried church until I stopped going to church. I had tried everything in my own self will, right? To get clean by on my own. I went to counseling. They couldn't identify with me, right? I talked to my medical doctor. She looked at me like I was a sick dog when I told her I was using methamphetamine by that point at 33 years old, 34 years old. And, at 30, 36, my wife asked for a divorce. And I thought, if I'm losing my family, I must be missing something. And I was in bad denial. So there was really only one place left to try and go, and that was to rehab, where I had never been to rehab before.
How long did you fight with denial?
Oh yeah. A long time. I mean, probably 10 years or something, right? When I had first met my future wife, I was, using close to every day, right? Um, but I drove a Lexus and I owned my own house and I was in graduate school. So she thought, I remember her saying, our first year married, when it was apparent that I was a drug addict, her saying, "I thought when we met you had your shit together." And I could point at a house and a nice car, and diplomas on the wall. And right. And so I probably struggled with that, thinking, well, everything's fine as long as I provide financially for my family. So I struggled for probably a good 10 years with denial, until at the end, my, my dad had passed away from lung cancer, probably closely tied to both his profession and his own drug use. My mom had disowned me. I hadn't talked to my brothers in a couple years. The only people that I was in any contact with were people I used, and really more importantly, the people I got drugs from. And there wasn't really anybody around to help me, in this endeavor, um, right? To go seek treatment and get to rehab. I did call in a couple old favors, particularly from one a former gang member who had been clean off of heroin 18 years. I called him and he gave me a place to stay 11 days while I waited for my bed date for rehab. Yeah, so
So when you went into rehab, when you went in, hey, I'm on the interview. Hold on, please. Sorry about that. Jesus Christ, it's been crazy today. I'm so sorry.
you're okay.
Man, it's been crazy. Um, so when you went into rehab, did you discover the 12-step program you go to now? Um, and did you stay or did you relapse? Is that a part of your story? You want to share that?
Sure, sure. Well, I came in very desperate, right? I remember calling the National Help Hotline because I had called a lot of detox centers and rehabs around me. And I called Washington, D.C., like National Help Hotline, and I was crying on the phone just saying, I need some help, right? I was in a lot of emotional pain from my wife having left and took the kids. Um, and the detox and rehab she was saying had all denied me already. And I said, no. I said, look, do you have anything that's faith based? And the gal on the phone said, oh, she told me the name of the rehab in Washington State, a few hours from me. And she said, they're a 12-step program. And I did not know what the 12 steps was. I never heard of it. I'd never heard of the 12 steps. I didn't know how that was tied to faith. But I said, yeah, that one. And I looked them up online and it looked like a beautiful facility. And I knew in my heart that that's where I wanted to go. And so I went there. And when I arrived at rehab, right, the police were looking for me for some illegal firearms they had recovered at my house, right? 6 illegal firearms. So that's up to 30 years in the state of Washington. Because I, even though I'm not a felon, I never got my firearm rights restored, right? Um, and so I was ducking the police. I didn't have any money. I had crashed my truck that morning because I had got drunk when the money I left my then wife for the mortgage. She told me she hired a divorce lawyer. Um, and I spent 3.5 hours walking the last little bit to rehab, and someone picked me up and gave me a ride the last 20 minutes. So when I got there, all I kept thinking was, man, this is so much better than jail. And I remember thinking, the food's better, people are nice. Um, about the third day there, my counselor, who looked like a seventh grade softball coach, he had pleated khakis and a button, polo shirt, very mild mannered, and he said he had 11 years clean, and that about knocked me out of my seat because my perception before the first 2 days was, here's another fucking counselor, right? And then when he said he had 11 years clean, I stopped the group. I said, hey, I said, what? I said, you're an addict? He said, yeah, methamphetamine cured my alcoholism. And I was like, wait, he told me he had been homeless and an alcoholic and a drug addict, and he had found 12-step recovery. And so I started listening because I thought, if this guy, I would never think he's an addict like me, right? And I'm 40 pounds underweight, right? I was in a terrible place emotionally, mentally, physically. I felt like death. I felt hopeless. And when I got that hope shot from that counselor, I started listening, right? And they had us work the first 5 steps while in treatment. So I got a taste of what 12-step fellowship could look like, right? And while in there, my wife started dating a former friend of mine who got out of federal prison. And something spiritual happened within me, right? I had pictured that I would go for a month to treatment. I would come out, I would be reunited with my wife and kids, and life would go on as it had before. Well, instead, she got pregnant by my former friend, right? And and when she told me she was dating him, I didn't freak out. I thanked her for her honesty, and I said, I just hope they respect you and our kids are safe around them. And the only thing I could say is that's due to the program, the principles of recovery. That's something God put on my heart, because that's really not me. And I realized that day, 2 weeks into treatment, that I was getting clean for myself, because without my wife, without my kids, without any family or friends or money, I liked how it felt to be clean, to be sober, right? Sober minded and clean. Yeah. So,
Did you ever relapse because of that? I
nope,
mean, during your clean time, did you ever relapse?
nope, nope. Like I said, I threw my street drugs out 11 days before I got to treatment. I drank alcohol that morning. I went to treatment, and um, I was very clear that I was going to stay in recovery. I was going to stay in active recovery. I was taught some simple things. I didn't really know what a meeting looked like outside of a treatment facility, but I knew I was on my way to a meeting, whatever 12-step fellowship I could find. And so I was going to go to a meeting so I could find a sponsor so I could work steps, because I was told that's what would save my life.
So,
And yeah, go ahead.
yeah, working these steps, did they definitely played a role in how you handled the situation with your buddy. I
Yes,
would assume the old you that was raised up in the streets would have really gave him one. Um, but you didn't, and you still have it.
correct, correct.
And that comes with patience, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, and being consistent on your step work, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. All of my solutions today come with the practical application of spiritual principles. And so I started going to a couple fellowships when I was, first out, just gauging the waters because I didn't really know where I belonged. I was looking for a sponsor. I got one locally. Some of the terminology didn't roll off my tongue right, to be honest. And I'd already took a service commitment. I found out that there were virtual meetings online for 12-step fellowships. So I started going in person, started going online. And a friend of mine, I'd asked them about their experience, strength, and hope with sponsorship because I really wasn't finding who I wanted to be my sponsor locally. And they laughed and said, "Look, my sponsor's on a different continent." And I realized it was loud. And so I knew who I wanted to ask to be my sponsor, someone I attended regular meetings online with. They live in New York City. I live in the state of Washington. And they
New
said, yes,
York City.
that's right. That's right. The Big Apple. And so I didn't relapse. I was very, very committed, because I like being clean.
Now,
I
can I
like,
ask you this? Since you've worked the steps and you're now 2 years, 6 days clean, I gotta ask, um, are you civil with the baby's mom? Are you civil with this Fred? Um, how are you handling that now?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I can just do my part. Next right thing for the next right reason. Right. I did for the majority of my clean time. I've had custody of my kids. That's changing, but not many people can say at 43 days clean they got temporary full custody of their three children, right? Particularly not men.
Well,
So there
especially where
was
you came from, you know?
correct, correct, yeah. And it took a lot to get out of my own self will and out of anger, resentment, and fear. But the anger and resentment of it all. The thing is that I want my children, just like my dad taught me, I want my children to love and respect their mother, right? And when I was on the verge of suicide when she left me, before I threw out my drugs, I was very much, on the verge of suicide. And so when I got out and I had something to live for in a way, because, I really wanted to be a part of my children's life. I couldn't imagine that I was going to get custody of them. But that, being Mr. Mom, right? Being
So,
dad there, and just trying to live a good healthy life, take care of kids, stay clean. Yeah.
all right, let me ask you this then. Um, Even though you're 2 years, 6 days clean, is there ever a time where you get a vision of you using? Like I know in my head, sometimes shit just pops in there, and I get this vision of what I used to do, and do you get those, and how do you deal with them? And did you have using dreams, and how did you deal with them?
Yeah, so I lost the desire to use, just for today. Like I said, I threw out my
How did
drugs.
you do that?
I don't know. I don't know, something spiritual. I just had enough, frankly, right? So I stopped using drugs. It turns out alcohol is a drug too, right? So, but with
What?
that, I don't. I just, after throwing out my drugs, after going to treatment, I realized that I like how it feels to be clean. I like how it feels to be sober minded. I got reconnected with my higher power, right? And
Considering where you came from, would you say that your life is boring now?
no, no, not all. There's no room to be bored in recovery. I don't
Well, so
understand why
many
anybody.
people think, yeah, so many people think that this is boring. Like, if they're not using, their life's going to be lame.
Yeah, I was worried before, I guess, before I got into recovery, what would life look like, without drugs? And, while I was in treatment, so they were, you had to go to the gym like mandatory, like 3 times a week, which was cool because I'm used to jail. Exercise is mandatory, every day. And one of the options was volleyball. And some of my friends were playing volleyball and they said, come play. And I was like, man, I haven't done that since high school. And I realized it was fun to play volleyball. We were laughing, joking, clean and good heartedly, right? And then a buddy said, hey, you want to play horseshoes? I used to play horseshoes with my dad. I'm not that good, but it's fun, right? And we were joking and laughing. Like my one buddy doesn't believe in God, and he catches a praying mantis, and I'm joking, telling him that's his spiritual support animal. The praying mantis is going to pray for him, right? And it's none of this filth, none of this dirt, right? And I just liked being clean. So, just for today, I don't have the desire to use. Now, I still get crazy ass thoughts sometimes, right? Like, do I have using dreams? Absolutely. They usually come around key tag time. I haven't had any in a couple months. Who knows when another one will happen. Um,
But they
but
do. But they do.
they do. Yeah. And that's part of post acute withdrawals, right?
Not too long ago, I had a dream where I was in a car and I seen this dude put my DOC on this like thing. And I looked at it and I'm like, nah, man, that's just disgusting. Like, fuck that. Because you said that you were like 40 pounds underweight, and I was
Right.
175 pounds I dropped down to.
Mm,
And it definitely takes a toll on your life. And
yeah.
looking back, could you ever see yourself go back to that life?
I would not want to. Um, is my goal is really about building a life that's so good that I don't want that I want to stay sober, that I don't want to use drugs, you know. I've made a decision and I make that decision every day, because I have a choice. It doesn't mean I couldn't go back and use. Fuck, I could make that choice today, and that would be a really, really awful choice.
Do
I
you
do not
put
want to
your
be in bondage.
recovery, do you put your
What?
recovery first?
Absolutely. Before my children, before anything.
Why do you do that?
Because the first thing I put ahead of my recovery will be the first thing I lose. I do not get to live the life that I have today without being in recovery, right? Like, you want clean time, you don't use, you don't die. Good. You got mere abstinence. That's great. Abstinence is a
What
good place to start.
what does using get you?
Using, for dereliction, that's a good place to start. I slack all my responsibilities, and then it obstructs my conscious contact with my higher power, right, with God, and then takes a toll on my health, all my relationships, right, and will wind me back up in an institution. You know,
Yeah, that's where we end up. Jails, institutions, and death.
correct,
And we've all lost people to the disease of addiction. Most of us that are in here.
right. I have
I've
10
lost two,
friends,
yeah,
10 friends dead to this
I've
disease.
lost two brothers to the disease of addiction.
Yeah, God rest their
Um,
soul.
and I was born into the disease of addiction, and I'm sure they were too.
Right.
And but even though we're born into the disease of addiction and we're introduced to it at a young age, doesn't mean that we have to live that way the rest of our life. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, there's a choice today because I'm not using, right? I have a choice. So I'm not, if I decided if I make a choice today to pick up, it is a choice, right? And then I will be powerless again. and I'll be back to nothing but finding ways and means to use. I know that about myself, but today I have, a really good life. It's not perfect, life on life's terms. I mean, just since I've been clean, look, my wife got pregnant by another man. I've been through a divorce. I was a pro se lawyer. I couldn't afford a lawyer, and I fought that case out. I've been raising 3 kids. Our marital home foreclosed. One of my cousins, not by blood, but my best friend's cousin. We always, he's closest family. He was murdered. I had a childhood friend. We were friends since we were 12. He overdosed and died, right? And I had to go to his funeral and navigate that clean, right? I
And
caught
not
one
use
miss.
because
Yeah,
your buddies died, right? You didn't go and use
exactly.
because, yeah.
Yeah, that's in the last 2 years what I've been through, and I've stayed clean through all that. Because if I can stay clean to that through that, anyone can. And I've met members in this program who have lost children and been through everything
Well,
that I just said, and
any
they
man's
didn't
man would
use.
say, you know what I'm going to say is that any man would say, like, like, oh, no way, they did that and you didn't fucking beat his ass and this, that, and another. But that's
Sure.
not the way of life, because that's going to end you up in jail. And then when you get out, you might decide to use again. So
Right.
you gotta pick the high road.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't afford the non-existent virtues of trying to be a macho man. I had to get rid of like the mask of being like a convict, the mask of being an intellect, right? And I had to focus on what really matters. Like if my recovery has to come first. And so, did it cross my mind to hit my former friend with a baseball bat? Absolutely, it crossed my mind. Did I think in my head some plotting things of how I'd get away with it potentially? Sure. Did I know that no matter what, I'd wind up in the interrogation rooms again? Absolutely. And what I thought was, where does that put my recovery, and what does that do for my children? So I can't afford to give a shit what anybody thinks about me today. I like
That's so
who
high
I
of you.
who I'm becoming.
That is honestly so high of you. And that's amazing. I've been through similar shit before and had to deal with it my way before I had recovery. But
Right.
the fact that you have recovery and these things happen to you, you've now created a social network for yourself, correct? That you can fall
Correct.
back on. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. There are a lot of tools in recovery, and I remember it was like my third, fourth day in treatment. My first assignment was to write a letter um, about my commitment to honesty in recovery, and the letter was to someone meaningful to me, right? And I wrote it to my ex-wife, and I didn't apologize in that letter. But one of the things I said that nothing I say will matter because, right, all I've been doing is lying for years and dashing her hopes. It only matters what I do. And I said in there that there are tools that I do not even know exist, but I know that I need them. And so my tools look like recovery literature. They look like recovery meetings. Looks like having a sponsor. It looks
How
like
many meetings you
uncovering.
go, how many
Oh, go
meetings
ahead.
you go to a day?
It depends on the day. I mean, I always go to at least one, and I would be lying if I said it was only one. I never go to less than two. At least I start my day and end my day. Sometimes I might be in 5 or 6, and that doesn't mean I'm just sitting there. I might be doing dishes. I might be writing step work. I might be cleaning my house. I might be exercising. I'm doing something else. But do I sit and focus on at least one meeting a day where I'm 100% attentive? Yes.
Awesome. And you do that every day because why?
And it's my safe place. That's meetings are my safe place, whether in person or virtually. That's where I find a place of empathy, a place of love, places of compassion, of understanding. I get to tell people what I think and how I'm feeling, so that they can share with me how they've gotten through things clean, and I can share with other people how I've gotten through things clean, how I'm getting through things clean. Like it's so great not to be alone. I choose not to go through pain alone today. I don't go through anything alone. I'm part of something greater than myself.
The best thing we can do for ourselves, I think, is to speak up. Um, and so often in meetings, I see these people, they come in with their head down and they look like shit. And they constantly remind me not to go back to that. Um, and how bad it's getting out there, and it's only getting worse, is it not?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, drugs have always been killing people, so you know. So, yeah, it definitely doesn't get any better out there. And so, yeah, I'm convinced not to go back, right? And I've realized that uh, what's included in my story, in my pain, in my experience, I realized that God's given me my own unique story, and He gives each of us it. And you know, a lot of men call me today, and they hear about my divorce story, and newcomers, and they call and they ask me things of how to go through it, right? And I can share with them how to get through a divorce clean. And just the other day, a newcomer, 80 days clean, called me, and he's talking about his soon-to-be ex-wife, and he says that fucking bitch. And I said, "Whoa!" I said, "No, no, we don't do that." And he said, "Oh, well, I wouldn't say it at court. It's just us two." I said, "Not even when you're alone, right?" And I can tell him this because I've done it myself, right? I said, "No, that's the mother of your children. No, not even alone. I get that you might have a thought. I've had a single thought, but in recovery, it is an active change in our attitudes and behaviors. And so I openly rebuke that. When I think that F and B, I say, nope, that's the mother of your children. She's to be treated with love, respect, and goodwill, right? And I use empathy to deal with resentments, and I
One
put
thing I could
myself in their
say,
shoes. What's
one thing
that?
I could say with the one thing I could say with a full heart is that, I never said anything to my kids. Maybe one time I slipped and said something, but other than that, I never said anything bad to them about their mom, like ever.
Right.
Um, and it's good that you tell other people that, so they don't make the bad decision and fuck somebody up and go to prison the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There's no sense in stewing in a resentment and stoking that fire. It does not help the situation. Um, the practice of spiritual principles eases the pain of living, and it gives me a lot of comfort to sit in acceptance. And it's a much better way to live, right, with unconditional love and goodwill than it is to have hatred and anger.
Now, one thing I want to speak of too, real quick, is that, so often I've heard you mention, God or whatever, but, I do want to ask you, is 12-step programs, are they typically religious based?
No, I mean, I think some of historically the foundations. I mean, the same could be said of science. A lot of our scientists in the past were, they were Christians or they were Muslims, right? But at 12-step fellowships, as a rule of thumb, no, you get to have the own God of your own understanding. And for unity's sake, I could tell you here, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. That's the God of my understanding, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And my friends know that, but I don't say Jesus while I'm in a meeting, at any fellowship. And my mind's been opened where, because other members don't tell me about how their God is, or what they do for spiritual practices. And then I get to know some of these people who I love and respect, and they tell me that they're Wiccans, or they're pagans, or they're
My God,
Muslims, or
my
they're
God.
Buddhists. And I'm friends with them, and I respect their recovery. I have atheists that have been in this program for decades, and they're atheists, and before I wouldn't have wanted to talk to them, and today they help save my life, and they
And it
love me
doesn't
even
matter,
when they
right?
find out I love Jesus. They still love me, and because we have unity in the meeting, right? I was told your higher power could be anything you want except a doorknob, because they'll turn on you.
It's funny you say that because, like me personally, if you look on the screen, I have these tarot cards. Um,
Right.
and for me, my higher power is the triple goddess Hecate.
Hmm.
And I speak to my higher power by pulling those cards. Um, and that's how I do it. But you didn't know that, and I didn't know that about you. See?
Yeah, we've been knowing each other for what, a good year and a half or more. I never knew that.
More.
Yeah, more than that, right? We've been knowing each other a couple years now. I didn't know that because,
Yeah.
The important thing is that you have your own spiritual journey, that you have your own rituals to connect with your higher power. Your prayer gets to look like your prayer, and it doesn't have to look like my prayer,
Now,
you
before
know?
we found our higher power, like before I like tuned into what really my higher power was, I have to be honest, I leaned heavy on the program because, the program I belonged to was, founded in 1953 and has been saving lives since then. And I knew that if I put all my will and my effort into the program that I would get something out of it. And I got in tune with my higher power because of it because recovery brought me to that peace, right?
Amazing. Exactly. We all get to have our own spiritual journey, and the cool thing is that we get to do it together. And really, it's what it's done is open me up to the diversity. Right? We're not supposed to all be rank and file robots. Roses and lilies are different, but they're both beautiful. Right? Like
And this
diversity
is
is the
coming from a
spice of
guy
life.
who this is coming from a guy who spoke for his race in prison.
Right.
And to hear you say these things now, about all the different people and the diversity. And it's amazing because you can see the program working in your life because of how you're answering these questions. So
Thanks.
for anyone to say that you're not living the program, would be wrong. Because I've seen it work in your life, and I've been going to that program for 3 years. And I've seen you for your 2 years come up on and off. And it's amazing. It's amazing to see your growth. And it's so often that newcomers come in and they think that they have to share this like astonishing speech. But typically I think that it's okay for a newcomer to come in and to repeat the same thing 5 times if they have to, right?
Oh yeah, I gotta share about it till I get to a solution about it. And that's something I've learned in recovery. I like I said, I gotta tell people what I'm thinking, how I'm feeling, and it's always got to be though towards the direction of I'm trying to get to a solution because it's a lit 12-step meetings are they're not group counseling per se, right? And for me it's also not a self-help thing. Like, do I put in work? Absolutely, but I can't do this by myself. I need other people. I need a program. I need a power greater than myself, and that includes like I said, I have one God, but I have multiple higher powers. Me and you, we're sitting right here talking is a power greater than myself alone. When I pick up the telephone, when I read literature, when I talk to my sponsor, my home group, they're all a power greater than myself. There's no conflict for me to have multiple higher powers and just one God, which is not how I believed when I got here. I thought I had to be staunch. But I don't really care much for religion, if I'm being honest. I like spirituality.
Yeah, I do too. And if there was one thing that you could tell a newcomer, coming in the way you came in, what would you say? What would you say to if you had to say one thing that would like keep them coming back?
you know, don't give up before the miracle happens. Because my miracle, it's not just that it's happened; it's that it's still happening. Um, you know, Looking back at my journey, had I decided to commit suicide before I went to rehab, right? Because I wrote my kids a goodbye letter. That's how close I came, right? I would have gave up. If when my wife said she was dating someone, if I had left treatment and went and committed a crime, I would have gave up. With when I found out she was pregnant, had I acted out towards her or decided to use it, it would have worsened my life, right? If I had, I put in a lot of work, and looking back at the previous 2 years, I'm so grateful that I continued to choose life and recovery, right? And today things have changed so much. I do own my own home again. I have started a small business. I'm a part of my children's life, right? I've fallen in love with a really beautiful woman who doesn't live near me. but I'm gonna go. It'll be our second time meeting in person, right? And we've been discovering intimacy beyond a physical level, right? I've met her once in person. I've known her for not quite 2 years, and I'm gonna go spend a week with her next month. And like that's a life that I could have never imagined or dreamed of 2 years ago,
And
right?
now it
And
looks different going into the relationship now that you have recovery.
oh yeah, way different than any relationship I've ever been in. And I don't control outcomes today, so I don't know, right? I just, I love a lot of people. I so happen to be in love with this one person, right? And I don't know if it'll all work out because I can't tell the future. But what I can do is I can live by spiritual principles, and say like, hey, if I'm doing my part and it's in God's will, then it's going to work out. And if I'm doing my part and it's not in God's will, it's still going to work out. Um, Using will never ever um, be my solution again.
It doesn't have to be.
It's a terrible solution at that. It doesn't fix anything, it makes it worse.
It's like, your tire blows and you put a donut on it, and then that blows and you just continue to ride on a fucked up rim. Like,
Right, right. That's a good analogy.
it's just it doesn't get you anywhere. And I think you've come a long way, especially explaining where you've been and how you got through it. Um, do you what do you think your purpose is today in life?
Oh yeah, today I'm two things, right? Um, I'm a recovering addict and I'm a really great dad. And I think God has some various purposes for me. Um, it's good to be able to carry the message and be of service and help the next person, right? Um, and that looks like sponsoring men, right? I get to sponsor some other guys, and I'm limited in my time, but to be of service to other people, service to meetings, service to my fellows, to answer the phone call and like carry a message of hope, and help the next person along. That's a very powerful purpose. Like I said, my story and my pain has, by their own words, not by mine, right, has helped a lot of people in their journey to stay in recovery. And so that's really great. It's just not all about me today,
Well,
right?
that's
So
because the
that
message recovery brings,
right.
through you. Um, and I do want to iterate though, even though this shit happened in your life, it doesn't mean that bad shit won't happen again. You know what I
Oh, it
mean?
certainly will. I mean, yeah, there'll be, yeah, life on life's terms will come again, right? And I was feeling very really really peaceful the last few days, and very happy. Not, I typically have a lot of joy even while I'm in going through tough stuff. And I was saying, well, I'm just going to enjoy, like, just for the moment, just for today, that that I feel happy, that it feels like my heart is healed, and life will pop back up. I don't know, but I'm not going to spend time wasting time worrying about when life will pop up because I can't control that. I'll just cross the bridges as they come, right? And I can get through whatever clean because I do the work.
That's right. It's definitely, again, a program of action. Um,
Hmm.
just like anything else, if you want a good body, it's not going to come to you if you sit there and eat Cheetos all day. Yeah.
Right, right. I've just been on a health kick recently. I don't know. 6 weeks ago, it popped in my head that I wanted to start swimming daily, and I thought, well, I might as well eat right. And so I've been using AI to like check out my shopping list, and I've been doing my calisthenics and push-ups and swimming. And in just a few short weeks, I've dropped maybe a little, like 10 pounds or something like that, and I feel a lot healthier. And I'm other than smoking cigarettes, I'm feeling like something just changed in my spirit. If I want something different, I need only but take some action.
Yeah, and you can have multiple spiritual awakenings. It's not just limited to one, you know.
Right, right.
Um, so with that, again, I am so sorry for any discrepancies earlier. I was dealing with my dog. She's just spoiled. But you know, I do appreciate your time today, and telling your story. Um, you know, I've always appreciated and loved you, and I've always thought that your story's been quite amazing. You know, and for you to be doing this today, is everything. It's also the therapeutic value of one addict helping another. Um, you know, whether it's, you know, to a simple individual recovery 12-step program. The point still remains that it's helping other people, and I appreciate your time today. And again, I apologize for any discrepancies there were, to you, Rattlesnake.
Yeah, you're good, Luna. Thank you so much for having me, and yeah, thank you to everyone who listens to this. I hope they'll find some encouragement, something that helps them in their journey from my story. Like that's the real purpose of why I agreed to this interview. So yeah, thank you for having me, and you know whoever's listening, God bless you. Just you know keep fucking going no matter what.
Yeah, no shit. And stay here for a second, but thank you everyone for listening. Again, this is Recovery in the Raw, and you just heard Rattlesnake Dan's story, despite all the other bullshit that was going on in the background. But it's his story nonetheless. And I appreciate you and love you, and I'm going to stop this and then stick around.